Chapter 1: The Village of Silent Dreams. The small village nestled in the valley was a place where time seemed to stand still, a quiet refuge away from the rest of the world. It was a place where the rhythms of life were simple but steady. The sun rose each day to illuminate the same dirt paths, the same humble cottages, and the same small family farms. The villagers, bound by tradition and the land, moved through their lives with an unspoken understanding: this was home, and here they would remain until the end of their days. Lila had always known this village, its soil, its people, and its ways. She had been born into a humble family of farmers. Her father, Kadir, was a man of few words but strong hands, capable of tilling the earth with a skill passed down through generations. Her mother, Alia, was a quiet, loving woman whose hand seemed to never tire, whether she was cooking a hearty meal or weaving baskets for the market. They had lived like this for as long as Lila could remember, and though their life was far from easy, it was full of warmth and love. Lila, with her bright, inquisitive eyes and wild imagination, was different from the others. While the village accepted the world as it was, Lila always felt as though there was something more, something beyond the distant hills and the vast, untouched forests that surrounded them. She listened intently when travelers came through the village, their tales of bustling cities, towering buildings, and the hum of progress igniting a spark deep within her heart. Lila had heard about places where the earth was tilled with machines, where there were schools where children learned not just to read and write but to invent, to dream in new ways. But here, in the valley, life was stagnant, and dreams seemed to fade as quickly as they arrived. She knew her family needed her. Her father was aging, his body slowing down from years of hard labor under the unforgiving sun, and her mother could not handle everything on her own. Every day, Lila would rise with the sun, helping her father tend to the fields, sowing seeds in the spring and harvesting the crops in the summer and fall. The rhythms of the earth were her rhythms, and her life was tied to the land as much as the soil itself. The villagers had always lived the same way, generation after generation. There were no doctors, no teachers, no access to modern conveniences or technologies. The people were content with their lives, though the hours were long and the work never seemed to end. Lila, though, could never quite silence the whispers of possibility that swirled around her whenever she encountered a traveler or heard tales of faraway places. There was a longing within her, a desire for more than what the valley could offer. But there was no room for such dreams. There was too much to be done. The land needed to be worked, the house needed tending to, and the village needed every hand it could get. Leaving would mean abandoning her family, her community, and all that she had ever known. Lila had learned, like everyone else, that duty was more important than desire. The village needed her, and so did the fields. The thought of leaving was selfish, and that was not who she was. The seasons passed, and the world outside the village seemed like a distant memory. The days were long, but the work was satisfying. Lila took solace in the simplicity of life, though her heart would occasionally drift to the images of the far-off places she had heard about. Yet, every time her mind wandered, she would remind herself that there was no place for such dreams in the valley. Her family needed her here, and so she stayed. Then, one autumn evening, a storm arrived. It came swiftly, as storms often do in the valley, sweeping over the hills with a fury that was both terrifying and beautiful. The wind howled through the trees, and the skies darkened with thick clouds that seemed to weigh down upon the earth. Lila had never seen a storm like this before. Her father, who had weathered many storms in his life, looked out from their small cottage with a grave expression. "This one is different," he murmured, his voice tinged with unease. The storm lasted for hours, pounding the village with torrential rain and fierce winds. Trees were uprooted, small rivers swelled and flooded, and the fields that had taken months of hard work to prepare were destroyed in a matter of moments. Lila stood in the doorway of her home, watching the destruction unfold before her eyes, helpless against the power of nature. By the time the storm had passed, the village was left in ruins. The crops that had been carefully nurtured throughout the year, corn, wheat, vegetables, were all gone. The fields, once full of promise, were now a sea of mud and broken plants. The wind had carried away anything that wasn't anchored down, and what was left behind was unrecognizable. Lila's father, who had been up all night helping the other villagers secure their homes and belongings, had caught a chill. He was exhausted and weakened by the storm, his body succumbing to a fever that quickly grew worse. Alia, who had always been the rock of their family, could not hide her fear. There was no doctor to turn to, no medicine to offer, just the old remedies passed down through generations, none of which seemed to work. The village fell silent in the days that followed. The once bustling place, where laughter and life filled the air, was now quiet and somber. The loss of the crops meant hunger, and the loss of hope meant despair. People gathered in small groups, trying to figure out how to rebuild, but their efforts seemed futile. There was no way forward, only the weight of what had been lost. Lila, in her heart, knew that the valley had reached a breaking point. But as the days passed, she found herself standing at the edge of the destroyed fields, staring out into the horizon. In the silence of the valley, something stirred within her, a realization that this moment, as devastating as it was, could not be the end. It had to be the beginning of something else. The village had lost much, but it had not lost everything. There was still life here, there were still people, still the land that had, for generations, fed them. The storm had taken so much, but it had not taken the possibility for renewal. This was a moment of reckoning, and Lila understood that now was the time for change. Her dreams, once dismissed as fantasies, now seemed more like a lifeline. She knew that the valley could not continue in the same way it always had. There had to be a way to rebuild, not just the fields, but the very spirit of the village. And somehow, she had to be the one to help lead them there. In the midst of the devastation, Lila's resolve was born. She would not let this be the end. The winds may have stolen their hopes for a moment, but she would carry them back, one small step at a time. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Lila knew that change was possible. It was time to leave the past behind and embrace the future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. With this thought, Lila turned back toward the village, ready to face whatever came next. The valley might be silent now, but the dreams of its people were not gone. They were simply waiting to be awakened. Chapter 2: The Call of the City. Lila sat at her father's bedside, her hands cool against his fevered brow. The storm that had ravaged the valley had left its mark not only on the land, but on her family and her heart. Every hour she spent nursing her father back to health, she wondered how they would recover from the destruction. Yet, even as despair threatened to settle, Lila remained steadfast. Her father, a man who had always embodied resilience, whispered to her one evening, his voice barely audible, "You have the strength to mend what is broken, Lila. You always have." The storm's devastation had brought silence to the village, but one day that silence was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the elder's door. A letter had arrived, rare in this remote place, carried by a wandering traveler who had braved the rugged terrain. The letter was addressed to the village elder, but contained a surprising mention of Lila's name. It was an invitation to the city, a place she had only dreamed of, requesting her assistance in the establishment of a new school. No one could explain how her name had ended up in the letter, but the villagers took it as a sign, murmuring about fate and providence. When the elder handed her the letter, Lila stared at it for what felt like hours. Her mind raced. The city? It was a world so far removed from the one she knew, a place she had only heard about in travelers' stories. The letter promised opportunities, work, learning, and the chance to contribute to something greater. But it also represented leaving behind her family and her village at a time when they needed her most. That night, as the village slept, Lila sat under the open sky, the stars shining down like silent witnesses. She felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. Her heart yearned to stay, to help her family and her community rebuild after the storm. Yet, another part of her, a part she had often suppressed, whispered that this was the moment she had been waiting for. Perhaps this journey was not an abandonment, but an act of hope, a way to learn something that could save them all. With a heavy heart, she made her choice. At dawn, she packed a small bag with a few essentials and stood before her parents. Her father, though still weak, gave her a nod of approval. Her mother, tears streaming down her face, embraced her tightly. "Go," Alia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Find what you need to help us. And come back to us." The journey to the city was long and arduous. The narrow trails and dense forests eventually gave way to cobblestone roads and the hum of activity. As she approached the city gates, Lila's breath caught in her throat. The city was nothing like she had imagined. It was larger, louder, and far more alive than the tales had ever conveyed. The streets buzzed with the energy of people moving with purpose, carts laden with goods, and the constant hum of voices rising and falling like the tide. Lila was greeted by the headmistress of the new school, a kind yet formidable woman named Clara, who explained the vision for the school. It was not just a place for children to learn their letters and numbers, it was a place to instill knowledge that could transform lives. The school needed someone who could bridge the gap between the simplicity of the village and the potential of the city, and Lila's name had somehow come to their attention. Thrown into a whirlwind of activity, Lila quickly adapted to her new environment. She taught children how to read and write, but she also found herself learning. The city was a repository of knowledge, brimming with ideas and innovation. She attended workshops on agricultural techniques, water conservation, and community building. The more she learned, the more she realized how much her village could benefit from these advancements. In the evenings, she would sit in her small room, writing letters to her parents, describing the city in vivid detail. She wrote about the irrigation systems that allowed the city to flourish, even during dry spells. She described the machines that made farming more efficient and the collaborative spirit of the people who worked tirelessly to improve their lives. With every letter, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was not here for herself, she was here for her village. But the city also posed challenges. It was easy to get lost in its pace and ambition. Lila found herself torn between two worlds. She loved the city's dynamism and the sense of possibility it offered, but she missed the simplicity and intimacy of her village. More than anything, she feared losing herself in this new environment, forgetting the values and traditions that had shaped her. One day, while working in the school's small garden, Lila met an older man named Ibrahim. He had been a farmer before moving to the city and now dedicated his time to teaching sustainable agricultural practices. Ibrahim became a mentor to Lila, sharing his experiences of how he had brought knowledge from the city back to his own village years ago. His stories gave Lila hope and a roadmap for what she might achieve. Through Ibrahim, Lila learned of new methods to grow crops, ways to enrich the soil naturally, rotate crops to maintain fertility, and use water judiciously. She attended demonstrations on innovative tools that could simplify farming tasks and discovered techniques to combat pests without harming the environment. Each piece of knowledge felt like a key to unlocking her village's future. Despite her growing sense of purpose, Lila often found herself standing on the city's highest point, gazing toward the distant horizon where her village lay. Could she truly bridge the gap between these two worlds? Could she bring the progress of the city to her people without losing the essence of who they were? These questions weighed heavily on her heart. As weeks turned into months, Lila became a vital part of the school and the community around it. Her determination and ability to connect with people won her the respect of her peers. But deep down, she knew her time in the city was not permanent. She had come to learn, to grow, and to gather the tools she needed to rebuild her village. Her journey was far from over. One crisp morning, Clara handed Lila a small notebook. "For your plans," Clara said with a knowing smile. Lila opened it and began to write, filling the pages with sketches of irrigation systems, outlines of crop cycles, and lists of resources she would need. Each stroke of the pen brought her closer to her goal. Lila knew she had found what she came for. The city had taught her many things, but the most important lesson was that progress did not have to mean abandoning the past. It was about finding harmony between tradition and innovation, about nurturing roots while reaching for the sky. And so, with her notebook in hand and her heart full of resolve, Lila prepared for the next chapter of her journey, the return to her village and the task of bringing her dreams to life. Chapter 3: Seeds of Change. When Lila stepped back into the village, it felt both familiar and foreign. The rugged mountains, the winding dirt paths, and the humble homes of stone and wood were the same, yet something had shifted. Perhaps it was within her, a sense of purpose that made the world seem brighter, more alive. She had returned, not just as a daughter of the land, but as a messenger of change. The villagers greeted her with cautious curiosity. They had heard whispers of her time in the city, tales carried by passing travelers and the letters she had sent. Many were eager to hear her stories, while others, especially the older generation, regarded her with wary eyes. The city, to them, was a distant and enigmatic place, filled with ideas that seemed incompatible with their way of life. Lila knew she had an uphill battle ahead. Change was never easy, especially in a place where traditions were the lifeblood of the community. She began by calling a meeting with the village elders. Gathered under the ancient oak tree that stood at the heart of the village, the elders listened as Lila spoke passionately about what she had learned. "The storm showed us how vulnerable we are," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But it also gave us a chance to rebuild, not just our fields, but our future. The city has taught me ways to strengthen our land, to protect our water, and to ensure that our children do not face the same hardships. The elders exchanged skeptical glances. One of them, a man named Haroun, spoke up. "We have lived this way for generations, Lila. Our ancestors survived without these new ideas. What if these methods fail us? What if they bring more harm than good?" Lila met his gaze. "I understand your fears, Haroun. Change is frightening. But what I propose is not to replace our traditions, but to enhance them. To take what is good and make it better. We can honor our ancestors by ensuring their sacrifices were not in vain." It took days of conversations, demonstrations, and persistent encouragement before the first seeds of her vision began to take root. Lila started with the youngest farmers, those who were more open to experimentation. Together, they tested new methods of planting, using the techniques she had learned in the city. They enriched the soil with natural compost, rotated crops to maintain fertility, and set up simple irrigation systems to conserve water. Her father, now fully recovered, became her greatest ally. He worked tirelessly alongside her, his presence lending credibility to her efforts. "If Lila says this will help, I believe her," he declared to a group of skeptical farmers. "She's not asking us to abandon our ways, only to adapt. Isn't that what we've always done to survive?" Slowly, the village began to change. The fields that had once struggled to produce enough food began to flourish. Crops grew taller and healthier, their vibrant green leaves a stark contrast to the barren land of the past. The villagers watched in awe as the first harvest under Lila's new methods exceeded their expectations. Water, once a scarce and precious resource, was now managed more efficiently. Lila taught the villagers how to dig small trenches to capture rainwater and create reservoirs to store it for drier months. These simple changes transformed the way they viewed their environment. No longer did they see themselves as mere victims of nature, they began to see themselves as its stewards. But the journey was not without challenges. There were those who clung to the old ways, convinced that any deviation from tradition would bring misfortune. Some accused Lila of meddling with forces she did not fully understand. "The land has its own spirit," one elderly woman warned. "We cannot control it." Lila listened patiently, never dismissing their concerns. She understood that their resistance came from fear of losing what little stability they had left. "I am not trying to control the land," she explained. "I am trying to work with it, to understand its needs so that it can continue to provide for us." Her patience and persistence began to win over even the staunchest skeptics. She held workshops under the shade of the oak tree, demonstrating how to plant seeds in a way that maximized growth. She invited the doubters to taste the fruits of the new harvest, letting the results speak for themselves. The village, once quiet and somber, began to buzz with activity. Children played in the fields, their laughter echoing through the valley. Women gathered to discuss new recipes for the abundance of crops, while men worked together to expand the irrigation systems. The sense of community, once eroded by the hardships of the storm, was slowly being restored. One day, Haroun approached Lila as she worked in the fields. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice gruff but sincere. "You've shown us that change doesn't mean losing who we are. It means growing into something stronger." Lila smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We've done this together, Haroun. The strength of the village lies in its people." As the seasons passed, the village began to thrive in ways Lila had only dreamed of. The fields yielded more than enough food, allowing the villagers to sell the surplus in nearby towns. The income was used to repair homes, build a small school, and invest in tools that made farming less labor-intensive. For the first time in years, the villagers felt a sense of security and hope. Yet, Lila knew her work was far from over. There were still challenges to face, still lessons to learn. But as she looked out over the flourishing fields, the sun casting a golden glow over the land, she felt a profound sense of peace. The seeds of change she had planted were not just in the soil, they were in the hearts of her people. And those seeds, she knew, would grow for generations to come. Chapter 4: The Legacy of Resilience. Time, like the seasons, had its way of weaving stories into the fabric of the land. For Lila's village, the tale of transformation was no longer whispered in passing but etched into the hearts of its people. The small, once forgotten community had blossomed into a model of resilience and ingenuity. What had started as Lila's determination to bring change had grown into a legacy that reached far beyond the valley. A flourishing village. The fields were no longer barren patches of earth, but sprawling stretches of green and gold. Crops swayed in the breeze, their abundance a testament to the villagers' hard work and their embrace of Lila's ideas. The water conservation systems had turned the once scarce resource into a reliable lifeline, ensuring that the fields thrived even during the driest seasons. Farmers who had once scoffed at change now stood proudly beside their bountiful harvests, speaking of Lila's vision as if it had been their own. Her techniques had not only revived their land, but had taught them the value of adapting, of working with the land rather than against it. The community, once fragmented by fear and uncertainty, had grown closer. The spirit of collaboration that Lila had ignited brought the villagers together in ways they had never imagined. Festivals became grander, laughter more frequent, and their lives richer in every sense of the word. The ripple effect. News of the village's transformation began to spread to neighboring communities. Travelers, merchants, and even officials from the city came to see the miracle for themselves. Some sought advice, others came to learn, and a few simply marveled at how a small village had achieved so much in such a short time. Lila welcomed them all, sharing her knowledge with humility and grace. "The success here belongs to the people," she would say. "I only brought the seeds of change, they nurtured them." Yet, the visitors often left with more than agricultural techniques. They carried with them a sense of hope, a belief that change was possible no matter how dire the circumstances. Neighboring villages began adopting the methods Lila had introduced. Over time, the entire region started to flourish. Markets that had once been sparse now overflowed with produce, crafts, and goods. The once isolated valley had become a hub of progress and prosperity. Challenges and triumphs. But the journey was not without its difficulties. Some seasons were harsher than others, and there were times when even the best methods seemed to falter. Yet, the villagers faced these challenges with resilience. Lila had taught them not just how to grow crops, but how to grow as a community. When pests threatened their fields, they worked together to find solutions. When a particularly harsh winter arrived, they shared resources, ensuring no one went hungry. The lessons of cooperation and adaptation had become second nature, and the village faced each trial with unwavering determination. Lila herself became a symbol of strength and wisdom. People came to her for guidance, not just about farming but about life. She had become a leader in the truest sense, not through authority but through example. Her ability to listen, to empathize, and to inspire had made her the heart of the community. Building for the future. As the years went by, the village continued to evolve. A small school was built, where children learned not only to read and write but also about agriculture, water management, and the importance of innovation. Lila often visited, sharing stories of her time in the city and teaching the next generation the value of dreaming big while staying grounded in their roots. The village also developed a marketplace that attracted traders from far and wide. The income generated allowed for further improvements, a clinic, better tools for the farmers, and even a small library where books from the city were carefully stored and shared. The elders, once wary of change, now spoke proudly of how the village had preserved its traditions while embracing progress. The songs and dances that celebrated the harvest were still performed, but they were now joined by new practices that ensured the harvests continued to grow. Lila's reflection. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the valley in hues of gold and crimson, Lila stood at the edge of the fields. She watched as children played near the irrigation canals, their laughter mingling with the rustling of the crops. Nearby, her father, now an elder statesman of sorts, shared stories with a group of young farmers. The sight filled her heart with a deep, abiding peace. She thought back to the storm that had upended their lives so many years ago. What had once seemed like a moment of despair had become the catalyst for change. She realized that resilience was not just about weathering the storm but about finding the strength to rebuild, to grow, and to create something better in its wake. Lila knew she would not live forever, but she also knew that the seed she had planted, both in the soil and in the hearts of her people, would endure. Her journey had been one of sacrifice and determination, but it had also been one of love for her family, her village, and the promise of a brighter future. A legacy of hope. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Lila whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, not to the heavens, but to the land, the people, and the journey that had brought them all here. Her legacy was not just the thriving village, but the resilience and hope that now defined it. And so, the once silent village, nestled in a distant valley, became a testament to what was possible when dreams were nurtured, challenges embraced, and hearts united. It was no longer just a place on a map, it was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope, and a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Chapter 5: The Journey Continues. As the seasons unfolded into years, the legacy of Lila grew far beyond the borders of the village she had once called home. The land that had been transformed by her vision became not just fertile soil for crops, but a foundation for innovation, progress, and collective memory. People who had known her spoke of her not as a mythical figure but as a woman of flesh and heart, a symbol of resilience who had walked among them and inspired them to reach beyond their grasp. A town rising. The village, once a modest collection of humble homes, expanded into a thriving town filled with laughter, industry, and the pulse of new life. Where once only rudimentary homes stood, there now rose buildings of stone and wood, housing families who worked together to create a community that honored the past while embracing the future. The town square became a bustling hub of activity, where farmers traded their produce, artisans sold their crafts, and children played games that echoed with the timeless joy of youth. At the heart of the square stood a statue of Lila, carved from local stone, her eyes forever looking out over the fields she had once toiled. It was a place for reflection, a place to remember how far they had come and how far they could still go. The School of Dreams. The school that Lila had helped build became more than an institution, it became the beating heart of the community. It was named the School of Silent Dreams, a nod to the early days when dreams whispered only in quiet places had grown into the reality that surrounded them. What had started as a small building with simple wooden benches had expanded into a center of learning, complete with classrooms, a library, and spaces where young minds could explore art, science, and philosophy. Children who might once have followed in their parents' footsteps as subsistence farmers now had choices. They could become teachers, engineers, poets, or civic leaders. They could study advanced methods of agriculture to improve their homeland or learn about the world beyond the valley. The school was a place where curiosity was cultivated, where Lila's legacy of embracing the unknown was passed down through generations. Many of the town's best minds had started their journey in this school, and some returned after studying in distant cities to share what they had learned. They carried forward Lila's tradition of bringing knowledge back to where it was needed most. A new generation of leaders. One of the most striking impacts of Lila's work was the emergence of strong, compassionate leaders. Among them was young Thomas, a farmer's son who had become an advocate for sustainable agriculture and environmental protection. He had grown up hearing stories of Lila's perseverance and had taken those stories to heart. Thomas led community projects that combined traditional methods with modern practices to enhance crop yields without depleting the soil. Another leader was Ilona, a teacher who had studied abroad and returned to guide the next generation in critical thinking and innovation. Ilona believed deeply in the power of storytelling and often taught classes on the oral history of the town. She wove stories of Lila and others into a tapestry that reminded the children of where they had come from and how far they could go. Preserving the heart of the land. As the town grew, there was always a conscious effort to preserve the heart of the land. Nature and tradition were not sacrificed in the name of progress, they were woven into it. The people continued to celebrate the harvest with festivals that combined ancient rituals with new traditions. The songs and dances were filled with joy and reverence, acknowledging the land that sustained them and the wisdom that guided them. Older villagers would often tell tales of the days when hope seemed lost and how Lila had shown them a path forward. Those tales were passed down like heirlooms, treasured for the lessons they held. The community maintained sacred spaces, orchards planted by Lila's own hands and fields that had been her sanctuary in hard times. These places became symbols of growth and resilience. The spread of hope. Lila's legacy was not contained within the valley. Travelers who visited the town carried stories of its transformation to distant lands. Her ideas on sustainability, community building, and education became subjects of discussion in places far beyond the mountains. Scholars came to study how one woman's vision had uplifted an entire region, and activists came to learn how to spark similar change in their own communities. Yet, in all its growth, the town never forgot its origins. The sense of unity and shared purpose that Lila had instilled remained central. Projects were often tackled collectively, from building new irrigation systems to creating spaces for art and expression. Even disputes were settled through dialogue and understanding, following the example of empathy and communication that Lila had modeled. Lila's home and legacy. Her home, now preserved as a museum, became a place of pilgrimage. People would visit the modest farmhouse where she had grown up and see the tools she had used, the books she had read, and the letters she had written to inspire change. Inside, a simple plaque bore one of her favorite sayings, it is not where you are planted but how you grow that defines your legacy. On the anniversary of her passing, people from across the region gathered to honor her life with songs, stories, and tributes. Elders and youth alike spoke of how she had touched their lives, some with her direct teachings, others through the continuing impact of her work. The ceremony was not one of sorrow but of deep gratitude and enduring hope. Endless horizons. As the town continued to grow, it faced new challenges and opportunities. Technological advancements brought further prosperity, but the community never lost sight of the core values Lila had taught them: resilience, compassion, and the importance of dreaming boldly while caring for one another. Though Lila had long since passed, her journey continued through the lives of those she had inspired. Her legacy was in the laughter of children playing in the field she had once toiled, in the knowledge exchanged within classrooms she had envisioned, and in the hearts of all who dared to hope, even in the face of adversity. The journey that Lila began was far from over. As long as there were fields to tend, knowledge to share, and hope to inspire, her spirit would remain an eternal part of the land she loved and the people she uplifted. The journey, like the community she had built, would always continue. The timeless power of resilience, growth, and community. The story of Lila is one that resonates not only with those who experienced it firsthand, but also with generations that followed. Its theme of resilience, growth, and the power of knowledge and community is not merely a reflection of a distant past, it is a timeless lesson that transcends time and place. In every era, there are moments of adversity, moments when the world seems to close in on itself, and yet, it is precisely during these moments that the human spirit has the potential to rise above, to adapt, and to create something beautiful. Lila's journey reminds us that even in the most trying circumstances, the willingness to change, the strength to lead, and the courage to hope can ignite transformation and shape a brighter future. The essence of resilience. At the heart of this story is the concept of resilience. It is easy to be swept away by the storm, to succumb to despair when the winds howl and the crops wither. It takes courage to look beyond the immediate devastation and see the potential for recovery. Resilience is not just about survival, it is about the capacity to rebuild, to adapt, and to find strength in the most unexpected places. In Lila's story, resilience is evident from the very beginning. When the storm devastated the village, many could have given up. The loss of crops, the illness of Lila's father, and the overwhelming silence that fell over the community were enough to break anyone's spirit. But Lila, though she felt the weight of these challenges, saw them not as the end but as an opportunity for change. Her belief that a brighter future was possible, even after such devastation, became the bedrock of her actions. It is this resilience that would go on to inspire an entire community. When Lila returned from the city with new ideas and knowledge, it was not just the information she brought back that transformed the village, it was the resilience to embrace change and to believe that improvement was possible. The villagers, many of whom had lived their entire lives under the weight of tradition and struggle, had to summon their own resilience to step outside of their comfort zones, to accept that what had worked in the past might not work in the future, and that in order to thrive, they too had to adapt. The power of growth and knowledge. Lila's journey is also a powerful reminder of the importance of growth, not just in terms of crops or industry, but in terms of the individual and community mindset. Growth, in its truest form, is not simply about material gain, it is about expanding one's capacity for understanding, for learning, and for nurturing what truly matters. When Lila left the village for the city, she stepped into a world full of ideas and possibilities. The city offered her a glimpse of what could be a world where knowledge was not just passed down, but was shared, cultivated, and applied to improve lives. The innovations in agriculture, the advancements in education, and the collective spirit of progress that she found there were all transformative. But what truly changed Lila was the realization that growth was not confined to cities and that the wisdom she gained there could be used to nurture her own community. The idea that knowledge is not a possession but a gift to be shared is a theme that runs throughout this story. It is Lila's willingness to bring back what she learned, to teach others, and to trust in the potential of the people around her that sets her apart. Knowledge, when shared, becomes a force that empowers individuals and communities. It is no longer something that belongs to a select few, but something that can be used to uplift the many. Through Lila's efforts, the village was not just educated, it was transformed. The methods of farming that Lila introduced were not just technical fixes, they were part of a larger philosophy of sustainable living, of understanding the land, and of working with nature rather than against it. As the villagers began to implement these new techniques, the land responded. Crops flourished, and the once dying soil was revived. This was not mere luck, it was the power of knowledge applied with intention and care. It was growth in its truest sense, growth that nurtured both the land and the spirit. The strength of community. One of the most poignant aspects of this story is the emphasis on the power of community. It is often said that no one person can achieve greatness alone, and Lila's story is a testament to that truth. Though Lila's vision and courage were essential to the transformation of the village, it was the collective effort of the people that truly brought about change. In the beginning, when Lila first presented her ideas, the villagers were hesitant. They were rooted in the familiar, in the rhythms and routines that had sustained them for generations. Change, especially change that came from an outside source, was frightening. But Lila's patience, her resilience, and her unwavering belief in the strength of the community slowly convinced them. She didn't impose her ideas upon them, she invited them to join her on the journey of growth. The story emphasizes the value of shared effort, of working together toward a common goal. As the villagers began to implement Lila's techniques, they did so not as individuals but as a collective. The farmers worked together to implement water conservation systems. The elders shared their wisdom with the younger generations, passing down traditional methods that complemented the new ideas. The school that Lila had helped establish became a place where not only children learned, but where the entire community could come together to exchange ideas, to grow intellectually, and to build a brighter future together. This emphasis on community is crucial. In times of difficulty, it is easy to isolate oneself, to retreat into individual concerns. But the real power lies in coming together, in recognizing that the challenges we face are often not just personal, but collective. When we work together, we multiply our strength, our wisdom, and our ability to overcome obstacles. Lila's legacy was not just in the knowledge she shared, but in the sense of unity she fostered. She taught the villagers that no one person was responsible for their survival or success, it was the whole community that had the power to shape its future. Change and hope, a legacy for the ages. At its core, this story is one of hope. It is a story that shows us that change is not something to be feared, but something to embrace. Lila's journey from the quiet village to the bustling city and back again is a metaphor for the journey of life itself. There are times when we must step out of our comfort zones, when we must seek new knowledge, when we must risk the unknown. But it is also a story that reminds us that hope is not passive, it is active, it is something we create and nurture. The transformation of the village is a direct result of Lila's belief in the power of change and hope. By bringing knowledge back to her people, by planting seeds of possibility, she set into motion a transformation that would affect not just the present, but the future. The village, once struggling, is now thriving, and its success is a direct result of the willingness to embrace change and to work together to make that change happen. Lila's legacy is a beacon to us all. It shows us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way forward. It is not the storms or the hardships that define us, but how we rise from them. It is how we plant the seeds of hope, nurture them with knowledge, and let them grow that defines our legacy. The human spirit, when combined with resilience, growth, and community, has the power to create a brighter future, no matter the obstacles. And so, the lessons of this story remain as relevant today as they were when Lila first walked the earth. In a world that often feels divided and uncertain, we can look to the example of Lila and her village and find the courage to adapt, the wisdom to learn, and the strength to lead others toward a future filled with hope. Change, though difficult, is the seed from which a new world can grow, a world where hope, resilience, and community will always light the way.